Welcome to the Recovery Effect Podcast with Bill Vineyard. Recovery is Bill's passion and his life's work of 30 plus years. Now it's your turn to experience the Recovery Effect, a powerful mix of recovery, spirituality, philosophy, and most importantly, living life as your true self. Now here's your host, Bill Vineyard.
In 1958, Bill wrote a now famous article for the Grapevine called Emotional Sobriety, The Next Frontier. I think he had hopes that emotional sobriety would be the next big development in the Alcoholics Anonymous program. And this article kind of spurred that movement. I wish he'd went into it more deeply and maybe spend a little bit more time on that article, because I really had a difficult time grasping the full meaning of it. And it wasn't because of lack of effort. I bet I've read that article 50 times. But like everything else I have to go through, I've got to learn it the hard way. I have to experience it. Anyway, in this article, Bill felt that the lack of emotional sobriety was caused by a lack of maturity, and this lack of maturity was caused by a lack of humility. He stated that we had immature urges for top approval, perfect security, perfect romance. He said these urges were quite appropriate up until the age of 17, but was an impossible way to live at age 47 or 57. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't have any problem understanding that. I realized my own immaturity, and I've realized it for a long time. But I also realized that I wasn't alone in regards to this matter. In the early stages of AA, according to AA Comes of Age, Bill Wilson and his boys sent out a bunch of surveys to psychologists and psychiatrists trying to find out the personality traits of an alcoholic. Well, when the survey came back, there were so many different of opinion with these psychiatrists and psychologists that they just couldn't come up with one personality of an alcoholic. But Bill did say this: every psychologist and psychiatrist totally agreed on this one thing, and that was that the alcoholic was grossly immature. But you see, Bill suffered from real deep depression. He stated in one article that he could hardly put one foot in front of the other. He was so depressed at times. Bill discovered that what was causing his depression was an almost absolute dependency on people and circumstances to supply him with prestige and security and the perfect romance that he felt he needed. He went on to state that failing to get these, according to his perfect dreams and perfect specifications, he fought for them. And when he fought, he lost. And when he lost, he got depressed. In other words, Bill had these absolute dependencies on people and circumstances. And he felt that if these dependencies couldn't be met, then he couldn't get on with his life, or he would not be happy until they were met. And when he felt like he couldn't control those people and circumstances in order to get his dependencies met, he fought for them. He manipulated for them. And of course, when he lost, he just got depressed. He couldn't get them fulfilled. These dependencies that he was experiencing were emotional dependencies that controlled his emotional life. When these dependencies are met, you feel good. When they're not met, you feel terrible. In other words, our quality of life is dependent on people and circumstances. With a dependency, of course, comes a demand. When you have a really absolute dependency, you're going to demand from life and others that they fulfill these dependencies and meet your demands. Of course, life resists, people resist our demands. They don't want to become something that we want. They don't want to be made into something that they're not just to please us, just to meet a demand that we have on them. They're not going to give us something they don't want to give us, and when they do that, we get hurt. And when we get hurt, we get depressed. What Bill considered the healing circuit, and circuit is an important word here, folks. It's like an electrical circuit. He felt that the healing circuit was a sharing of God's love that He'd given us to His creatures and His people. That, Bill felt, was the circuit. In other words, what flows into us must flow out. The dependency blocks that flow. Because you see, a dependency is a selfish dependency. We're not sharing the love of God or what He's given us with others. We're trying to get our own needs fulfilled. And when that dependency becomes a demand, then we're trying to convert people into what we want them to be. We're trying to make circumstances abide by our rules and what we think we need. The love of God that flows into us, Bill felt, needed to flow out to other people and God's creation. And that, he felt, would be a successful way to live. What he considered the big problem is that these dependencies block that flow. It either block that flow from coming in or block that flow from going out, or block both of them. The action that Bill recommended that we take was absolutely revolutionary. He claims that if we can examine every disturbance, whether it be great or small, every disturbance we have, we will discover that at the root of it is some unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand. Whoa. I mean, that is a really big chunk to bite off. Again, it's just going back to kind of like an inventory. If we can examine these unhealthy, sick dependencies that we have, we'll be able to see these unhealthy, sick demands we put on people in life. We put demands on people that they can't meet. We put demands on life that will not happen. And of course, when these demands aren't met, it screws us up. And the truth is, most of these demands, because of these unhealthy dependencies, will never be met. Life doesn't work that way. Bill felt that we needed to surrender these demands. And he felt that if we did this, that we'd be set free to live and to love the way God intended us to. I don't know how many times I've been confronted by clients. When they ask to do something, I'll say, no, I don't think that's a good idea. And they give me a 5 to 10 minute lecture on how I let other people do things, but I won't let him. And this turns into, this isn't fair. Well, I'm not fair, and life isn't fair. But see, he puts a demand on me that I must meet in order for him to fulfill a dependency that life must be fair. He goes on ranting and raving that I don't treat everybody the same. And I always say, I know I don't, because everybody's not the same. And the saddest part of this whole scenario is these people that demand that I become absolutely fair and equal with everybody end up justifying their own reason for not working the program and being mad at me and the treatment center. Obviously, you can see the gross immaturity and the self-destructiveness in this scenario I just gave you. Maybe a lot of us can even identify with it. Well, I learned this painful principle through experience. And when I experienced this, I was in my bedroom about 10, 12 years ago, and I was doing a step 10. I was writing down a personal inventory. Well, as I was doing this thought entered my mind that said, I'm sure glad I made amends to my mother before she died. And this voice came to me and said, but did you? I said, yeah, I know I did. I went over to her house and called her out and was in the driveway, and I told her all the things I was sorry for. I never said one word about anything she did to me. I asked her for her forgiveness and how I could make it right. So I felt I'd really completed that amend. Then this voice said, Bill, if you really did that, if you really did it from your heart, then how come you continued to demand something from your mother that she didn't have? And when she couldn't give you this something that she didn't have, you made her pay for it. You let her know how bad of a mother she was. Because you see, my mother really couldn't ever love me. She could never bond with me. Me and her never got along. And what made matters worse was that I had a complete and total dependency on my mother being the kind of mother I wanted her to be. I wanted her to be in an apron with flour all over it as she's making cookies when me and my friends come home from school. I wanted her to tuck me in the night and tell me a little story and kiss me goodnight. And my mother wasn't like that. My mother liked men, she liked prescription medication, and she liked alcohol. But mostly she liked men. And this love of men kept her moving a lot, so we never really had any roots. But anyway, this dependency led me to unreasonable demands on her. When she didn't meet these demands, I became depressed and angry. My whole being depended on her becoming the kind of mother I wanted her to be. You see, I had this image in my head of what kind of mother she should be, and I tried to create my mother in this image. In other words, in short, I was being God. Of course, she never could live up to this perfect image of a mother, this TV mother that I had. Therefore, she was always failing. Therefore, I was never getting my dependency needs met. The more I tried to make her into what I wanted her to be, the more we fought. The more we fought, the more I lost. The more I lost, the more hurt I got. I mean, after all, I wasn't expecting much out of her. Just be what I want you to be and give me something that you don't have. I didn't see a problem at all with that. So when she couldn't live up to my specifications, I held her responsible for all the problems that I had. I held her responsible for all the problems I had in school, when I was out of school. And why did I hold her responsible for that? Because she could not meet the demands that I placed on her. She never had it to give. The only time I can remember that me and my mother really got along is when I used to take her garage selling. She used to love to go to all the garage sales in town, and I'd drive her around to them, and we had so much fun. She'd hit me in the arm, and we'd play around. We'd go to Sonic and have a tamale pie and just have a ball. Then I'd take her home, and I'd go somewhere else. One time I was sitting in the kitchen, and me and her got into an argument, and she come after me with a 2x4 when I was around 16 years old. And I jumped up out of the chair, ran out the door, jumped in my car, and left. About 2 weeks later, my mother called me up, and she said, "Bill, would you take me garage selling?" And I said, "No, Mom, not after what you did to me in the kitchen. I'm not taking you anywhere, and don't call back because I'm never taking you garage selling again." And we never did go after that. Well, when I was sitting there doing that 10-step thinking all this over, a tear came to my eye because I realized that because I was so angry at her over not being the kind of mother I wanted her to be, by her not meeting the demands that I felt she should meet, that I lost all the good time that I could have had with her. Those moments that we had at the garage sale were precious and priceless. I would give anything to go back and take her there again. When I realized that, I just bowed my head with a tear in my eye, and I said, "Mom, if you can hear me, I just want to tell you how sorry I am." And I said, I'll never talk bad about you again, except to show what a jerk your son was. Because, you see, I shouldn't have been worried about what kind of mother she was or she had been. I should have been worried about what kind of son I was. That's something I had some control over. I didn't have any control over what kind of mother she was going to be, but I did have control over the kind of son I was going to be. And I tell you, folks, I wasn't a very good son. So I agree with Bill Wilson on this issue. I realized that I had this absolute false dependency on my mother, and I also knew that I was demanding things from her that she couldn't give me because she didn't have it to give. And when she didn't give it to me, I made her pay. See, playing God is a hard thing to play, because sometimes when you're trying to create people in your image and you're trying to create the world the way you want it, it just doesn't work out. People resist being what you want them to be. People resist that you're demanding they give you something they don't want to give you. Life has a way of telling you to stick it. I'm not going to do that. And when these demands are not met, what do? We pout. All of a sudden we're victims. All of a sudden we're entitled, when in fact we're the one that's wrong, not everybody else in life. We're the one that's placing these unreasonable demands on people. We're the ones that have this perfect idea of what life should be for us. It's not life and it's people. The problem is way, way closer to home. We're the problem. I know that many of us has, and some of us still do, place demands upon our own sobriety. We feel that we must get our wife or our husbands back if we're going to get sober, or we can't stay sober without this job or this house or this thing or that thing. That things have to go a certain way for us to really give ourselves this program and stay sober. These are absolute dependencies, and those absolute dependencies mean that we make absolute demands on life and people to do what we want them to do, or we won't stay sober. We hear comments like that all the time. Well, how do they expect me to do this or that? If they don't give me my license back, there's no way I can go to AA and stay sober. We think our sobriety is dependent on these things, and our sobriety has no dependencies like that. We can get sober in any situation, any circumstance, any problem. Many of us has had to climb really high mountains to stay sober, but they've done it, and they're continuing to do it. I watch family members so scared that their child or their parent's going to get drunk that every time this person makes a demand, they scuttle around and hurry and work hard to make sure they're able to satisfy this demand because they live under the threat of him getting drunk if they don't meet it. And I guess they call that codependency. Okay, so in recapping this podcast, do you see how your own false dependency lead to those demands that causes you to be emotionally distraught? I mean, look at the example of my mother. I had this false dependency that I couldn't be a good person or be loved or be wanted or be successful until my mother loved me and bonded with me, until she became the kind of mother that I wanted her to be. I couldn't be whole or fulfilled. So with that dependency, I demanded that she do that she become what I want her to become, that she does the things I want her to do, and she simply could not do it. Number one, she didn't possess the things that I needed, so she couldn't give them to me if she wanted to. And number two, I was doing nothing more than playing God, trying to create my mother and her in my image. So we can see that these false dependencies lead to these demands that cause us, not others so much, but causes us to suffer. Well, where did Bill find his solution at? Well, of course, he said you had to get rid of those demands and fix those dependencies and things like that. And the action that he told us to take in regards to fixing those things was to look at each disturbance, great or small, and try to find that false dependency down there, and also the unreasonable demand that you're making on the world and others in order to fulfill that false dependency. But what he said that pulled him out of his depression was the St. Francis prayer. Not just saying that prayer, but living that prayer. And I'm going to take the time to recite that prayer because it's been so important to not only Bill Wilson, but also to AA as a whole. And it goes like this: Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. May God bless you and keep you until then, and may you continue to tread this beautiful road of happy destiny.
Thanks for listening to The Recovery Effect with Bill Vineyard. Check out more at therecoveryeffect.com and facebook.com/therecoveryeffect. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes.